Hello, and welcome to Anxiety Diaries, a weekly podcast about mental health, incredible people, and so much more. I'm your host, Scott Neumyer. I've been a journalist, a publicist, a writer, and an editor, but for the past decade or so, I've also been a very anxious person. Each week on the podcast, I'm going to talk a bit about my own personal battles with panic and anxiety disorder, but despite our show's title, this isn't just a personal diary. This is an anxiety diary that belongs to all of us. There will be interviews, roundtable discussions, and more. But most importantly, we're going to talk about depression, PTSD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and every other type of mental health issue that you can think of. This is a podcast for me, you, and anyone else you might know that's struggling. Anxiety Diaries is for all of us. Now, just a quick disclaimer. I am by no means a medical professional, nor are many of the guests you'll hear on the podcast. If you need help, please seek qualified medical attention. This podcast, while informative and fun, is no substitute for the real thing. With all that said, take a deep breath and relax. Here we go. So everybody tells you when you're starting a podcast, never do that boring first episode. You know, the one where everybody just has a huge brain dump and gives the background of their entire life and everything about them. Well, I'm going to do that today. Actually, I'm going to do it a little bit differently, though. I'm not going to do it in the boring way that you might think, and I'm not going to be crazy about telling you every single detail of my life, but I am going to tell you a little bit, because I figure if we're going to get to know each other on this podcast, you should know a little bit more about me. So I've already told you I'm a journalist, editor, but for the past 10 years, I've been super anxious, and it's something that I've been dealing with every single day. And I started writing about it back in 2013. And it all started with a story for SB Nation's long-form platform. There was a basketball player named Royce who was getting a lot of attention for coming out as someone who was dealing with anxiety disorder. And the NBA was not very accommodating. He was drafted by the Houston Rockets. It was a big, long story. So I decided to write about it, and I decided to write about it in my own way by making it a personal story as well. So I've been dealing with panic and anxiety disorder for probably my whole life, but I've really been dealing with it for the past 15 years or so. For a lot of people, it's hard to point to one specific instance or incident that you remember as your first panic attack. But I remember very vividly and very clearly my first panic attack that I internalized and really set off kind of this roller coaster that I've been on for the past 15 years. And I was going to tell you the story right off the top of my head, but you know, I really like the way that I wrote it in this Royce White story, and I'll leave the link in the show notes so that you guys can read it if you want to. But I'm going to read you a paragraph or 2 or 3 or 8 about the time I went to a Bruce Springsteen concert and had a panic attack at Lincoln Financial Field, because I really like the way I wrote it. And I think that's probably the easiest way to sum up how I felt at that time. And then I'll give you a little bit more detail about where I went from there. So here is that story. The Bruce Springsteen concert was supposed to be my reward for a job well done, a thoughtful thank you gift from a colleague, and something that I'd undoubtedly remember forever. I do. I remember it as one of the most difficult nights of my life. In 2003, I was 23 years old, studying for my teaching certification and working as a substitute in the schools I attended as a kid. I'd left the job in pharmaceuticals that paid well because I couldn't pretend to be interested in chemicals and numbers and Excel spreadsheets any longer. I wanted to be surrounded by books and students writing and other teachers and learning and all the romantic cliches imaginable. I spent the days wandering the halls being the quote-unquote cool sub, mostly because I was young and I let the kids get away with harmless things that most of the older substitutes wouldn't tolerate, while also serving as an assistant coach for the high school baseball team, the same team I played on only a few years before. After a successful season full of sunflower seed spitting, the head coach handed me a ticket to join him and his best friend at brand new Lincoln Financial Field for a summer night with the boss. He wasn't just a fan of Bruce Springsteen. He was a Bruce fanatic, hardcore, and had seen the boss live more times than I had years on the earth. I'd grown up rushing down suburban New Jersey roads in my dad's brown pickup listening to 8 tracks of classic rock, but it had been a long time since I really listened intently to any Springsteen. I could sing along to Born to Run, but that was it. There was no way I could possibly hold court with Coach, so perhaps my nerves were already on high alert before we'd headed down the Garden State Parkway en route to Philly in my friend's SUV. The goal was to try to have fun, but also make sure I didn't ruin his night. We arrived a few hours early, set up a couple of battered lawn chairs in the parking lot behind his SUV, popped a few beers, and listened closely to hear the faint sounds of the E Street Band doing their sound check. So far, so good. After downing the beers, I needed to pee. I held it in for a while, then let the guys know, and headed off on a slow jog toward the stadium. I ran perhaps a half mile before finding the back of a line to the Porta-Johns that was way longer than it should have been. I waited 15 more long, increasingly painful and uncomfortable minutes before I was finally able to relieve myself. On the way back, I met up with Coach and his buddy making their way toward the stadium. Our seats were right along the edge of the upper deck. Perfect view, great sound, and Bruce was just about ready to come out. Yet, I sat down in my seat next to Coach. Something didn't feel right. It's hard to describe that initial feeling, but now that I've experienced similar feelings so many times, I can take a pretty good stab at it. I felt my hands slowly getting clammy. I felt disoriented, and my vision began to blur. Flop sweat started to form at the top of my brow, and my stomach was turning. It wasn't yet rolling so hard that I felt like I was going to vomit, but it was uncomfortable, like the onset of motion sickness you might get trying to read while driving in the backseat of a car. It just wasn't right. I'm going to hit the bathroom, I told Coach, before popping out of my seat and looking back toward the stairs. I'll be back in a minute. Coach looked at me and, seeing the beads of sweat now dripping down my forehead and into my eyes, sensed something was wrong. You okay? He asked me. You need anything? Yeah, I said, I'm okay. Just not feeling the best at the moment. I think I just have to go to the bathroom. Maybe Coach thought I couldn't handle a couple beers and needed to hit the bathroom for a little drunken puke. Maybe he thought I was scared of heights, or maybe he really didn't care because his hero was about to take the stage. I can tell you with near certainty, however, that he didn't know that I was having a panic attack. At that very moment, I didn't even know. I found the bathroom, claimed an open stall, sat down and ripped off a few sheets of toilet paper to wipe away the sweat that was dripping down my face. I thought I'd use the restroom, feel better, and be dancing and singing in my seat in no time. Still not feeling very well, I soon headed back out. I didn't want to be gone for too long. I didn't want Coach to worry. As soon as I reached my seat, my head started to spin. I felt dizzy, and I started to lose a grip on my surroundings. I knew where I was, but I was beginning to feel that insular singularity that often comes with panic attacks. I was having trouble focusing on anything outside myself. Scott, I heard Coach say over the early guitar chords coming from the stage. You sure you're okay? You don't look so hot. Too many beers? Of course that's what he thought. He just assumed I was a lightweight. That was fine. Didn't matter to me as long as I didn't screw up his night. Not really, I told him, getting up from my seat again. I'm going to hit the bathroom again. I'm not sure what's going on. I rushed back to the bathroom, found the same stall available, swung open the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I sat down on the toilet, pants still on, and pulled out my candy bar-shaped orange Nokia phone. Hey, my girlfriend, now my wife, said when she answered my call. Aren't you supposed to be at the concert? I am, I told her. I'm in the bathroom. I've been in here a couple times now. I've spent more time in here than out of my seat. Why? She asked, not yet sounding that concerned or worried. Denise, I said as quietly as I could while still loud enough for her to hear me. I think I'm having a panic attack. So that was my first panic attack that I really remember vividly internalizing. It was hell, and if you've ever experienced a panic attack, you probably felt all those feelings yourself. It's horrifying. And that panic attack, though I did get through the night, we finished the concert, I went home, and it didn't really hit me that day. But a few months later, when school was back in session, I remember watching the kids, and I had a gym class that period. But the gym was, I don't remember if it was being renovated or something else, but we couldn't use the gym for some reason. So we were all in the library. It was packed. Library was completely packed, kids everywhere. And I was just sitting there. They were just having basically a study hall. And I remember one of the kids sitting talking to me. And all of a sudden I started to get those feelings again. And before the bell rang for the next period, I was totally out of it. I was so inside my own head, I couldn't even think straight. Whoever was talking to me must have just been talking to himself at that point because I don't remember anything about what he was saying. I do remember, though, that as soon as the bell rang, I grabbed my stuff and I rushed towards the main office, told them that I was sick, I had to run out, I had to go home, they had to cover the rest of the classes, and I ran out of there, got in my car, and drove home. And that was the beginning of the next, 6 months in bed, basically. So that's when it started for me. If you know me now, you know that I've been dealing with this for a long time, but I'm a very different person than I was then. And hopefully a lot of you are different people than you were when you first started dealing with these things. And if not, hopefully we're going to be able to help you. After those 6 months, I remember actually taking the test for my teaching certification. I passed it, aced it, wasn't a problem at all. But by that time, I knew I wasn't going to teach anymore. That was the last time I'd ever set foot in that high school as a teacher. I think I went back once or twice to drop something off or say hello to someone. But that was the last time I was ever there actually teaching classes. So I moved on to another job and did that for a few years, all while dealing with anxiety. I kind of would get in that job and I would make that place, that office, my home. I wouldn't really go out to lunch. I wouldn't do a lot of things. But I started to feel more comfortable once I actually came out and told my boss at that job how I was feeling. It took a long time for me to do that, but I was able to do it eventually. And he understood, and that made me feel more comfortable. And then I got a job working from home, worked in publicity for many years, and then went on to writing and journalism and editing and all that other good stuff. And my wife and I got married, and we had a child, and I've been dealing with this all through that, and that's something I'll talk about at some point again as well. But it's been 15 years now. 15 years. 15 years since that first night in Lincoln Financial Field. 15 years. And I'm still working on it. I feel a lot better. I do a lot more things now than I did those first 6 months, I'll tell you that. But it's still 15 years, and I'm still dealing with it. And I know at this point that I'm always going to be dealing with it. And that makes me feel upset, but it also makes me feel a little bit better. So no matter how long you've been dealing with this, know that it will get better. It'll take time. And we'll get there. So that's my story. I've got another kid now with my wife and a new job. And I'm still working every single day to try to keep my anxiety at bay. And that's why I wanted to start this podcast, because I wanted to be able to help you guys if possible by telling my stories. I am not a medical professional. I can't give you medical advice. I can't prescribe you medication. But hopefully my telling you some of my stories will help. And hopefully my having people on to talk about their experiences and their expertise and things like that will also help. That's my goal. And hopefully that's what Anxiety Diaries will do. So with that, that is my boring first episode. It's been 15 years of hell, honestly. But now there's hope. And that's one of the main things I want you to get out of this, is that there is hope. There's always hope. There's always a way to work on it, to turn things around, and to make things better. And hopefully we'll be able to help you do that. So stay tuned. We're going to have a lot of guests. The first few episodes will be really exciting. We've got writers and experts and educators and a whole bunch of other fun stuff planned. And that leads me to our question of the week. Do you remember your first anxiety attack? Do you remember the first time you really had a panic attack that you remember, you internalized, and it became an issue for you? And if you're not an anxiety sufferer, do you remember your first episode of whatever it is you're suffering from? We want to hear your story. So please call us, leave us a message at 732-903-4441, or drop us an email. You could even email us a voice memo if that's easier for you at anxietydiariespodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed Anxiety Diaries, please rate the show on iTunes, leave a review, and spread the word about the podcast. Those things really do help. You can find the podcast at www.anxietydiariespodcast.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter as well. And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Anxiety Diaries Podcast, where you'll be able to find all the show notes, links, and other things related to the show. We're also on Twitter at Anxiety Diary Pod. Thanks so much for listening. This has been the boring first episode, but I promise the next won't be all about me. I promise. Thanks again for listening. Be well, and we'll see you next week.